Hi there, my name is Captain Jeff. I do this show, an audio podcast called The Airline Pilot Guy, and you are watching, right now, you are watching the video of me recording my audio podcast. So it's just some old dude who happens to be an airline pilot for a major U.S. airline recording the Airline Pilot Guy show in his hotel room, sitting in front of his hotel room window, and that's it, yeah. And a computer, a mixer, recorder, and iPad for the video. So if you're interested in the show and you don't want to sit here for the next 2 or 3 hours, probably closer to 3, watching me as I record the audio program, head over to airlinepilotguy.com, and there you can either listen in, well, that would be the same thing, wouldn't it? In front of the computer, listening to the audio. So you can find me on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, and other places where you can download the audio, and then you can take me with you on your drives, your bike rides, your walking outings, running, whatever, and mowing the lawn. I listen to a lot of podcasts doing a lot of those activities. So, but if you insist, if you want to sit there and watch me via the video, have at it. Just wanted to warn you that that's what this is all about. I'm not in an airplane, doing great things like a lot of other guys are doing out there who are making things specifically for video. I'm doing it specifically for audio. So you're just seeing the behind the scenes stuff. So with that said, let me get my audio recorder running. There we go. Looks like levels are pretty good there. And yeah, that's it. So let me start off by saying Airline Pilot Guy, episode 119.
Flight 209, you're cleared for takeoff.
Roger.
LA departure 123.9.
Roger. Request connected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 1133 in the Sheraton Hotel in Springfield, Massachusetts. Let's see, in this episode, we're going to talk about some more near misses and what the FAA is going to do about it, at least in one location. We have a hard landing at JFK and some turbulence injuries and an incident with Lufthansa, and of course, the Malaysia Flight 370 update. Lots of feedback and more, so sit back and relax. Seatbacks in their upright and locked positions, electronic devices powered on. Flight 119 is ready for pushback. I just remembered that I didn't write any of that down on my little cheat sheet, my little script, so I had to think quickly on my feet there. Actually, I'm not standing up, I'm sitting down. Anyway, I'm in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I'm perched in front of my hotel room window, hoping to get as much light as possible for the video, if you happen to be watching on the video. And as I record the show, I'm sure that the sun is going to be going down and there's going to be less and less light, so I guess I might have to stop at some point and put a lamp or something in front of me, but that's good enough for now. I'm on day 2 of a 3-day trip, and let's see, yesterday we ended up in Pittsburgh around late afternoon, and had to battle thunderstorms. If you happen to be watching me or following me on Twitter, I tweeted a couple of the screen grabs from my iPhone as far as my route of flight and the weather, the thunderstorms that we were having to make our way through. Not too bad. And then again, that was between Atlanta and Dallas, and then back to Atlanta, and then up here to Pittsburgh. I thought we were, not here, but up to Pittsburgh. Thought we were going to be free and clear of nasty weather there, but turns out we encountered some of the most severe stuff yesterday going from Atlanta to Pittsburgh. But that's okay. We were able to find a soft spot in it all. let's see, today was nice. The weather this morning from Pittsburgh to Atlanta was nice, and from Atlanta up here to, into Bradley International, which is about halfway between Hartford, Connecticut, and Springfield, Massachusetts. And it's actually in a town called Windsor Locks, Connecticut. And an interesting story about Windsor Locks is that when you're a brand new airline pilot, or maybe not just an airline pilot, but for me, I was a brand new airline pilot. The joke is always to see how long it takes a new pilot to figure out how to find Bradley International in the Jeppesen charts, the book full of approach plates and airport diagrams and arrival and departure procedures, etc. I guess in the future, this is going to kind of be a moot point. You're just going to put in KBDL, and your iPad is just going to pop it in there. You won't have to leaf through your Jeppesen manuals anymore to find it. But just in case you're interested, because Bradley International is not technically Hartford, Connecticut, nor is it technically Springfield, Massachusetts. It's technically Windsor Locks. That's where the airport is located. So you would look up in your Jeppesen manual under the volume. We have 4 volumes on the airplane that I fly in alphabetical order. Like the first volume is A and B, and then C through H, and then F through. You get the idea. Well, you'd pick up your last volume and go all the way to the back, and somewhere, I think right after West Palm Beach, you would find Windsor Locks, and that's where you'd find Bradley, starts with a B, Bradley International Airport. So it's funny, when I was new, they said, "Hey Jeff, pull out the plate for Bradley International," and so I looked up under the B's, no Bradley. I think, oh, no problem, Hartford. Looked under H, nope, no H. And then finally they giggled and had a great time about it and said, "Look under W." And I went, "W? What?" Okay, well, I thought it was an interesting story. Maybe you didn't, but okay. Let's see here. What else do we want to talk about? Oh, of course, let's get this out of the way. Not that it's something that you have to really endure. In fact, a lot of you say that you end up kind of humming this sound, this song between episodes. Yes, it's the Java Jive, the Ink Spots. 1940. Okay, so to help offset some of the cost of producing my podcast and to contribute to my caffeine addiction, you can, if you'd like, contribute some money to my coffee fund. And you can find out all the information that you want about it at airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. And since the last episode, we have Andreas, Steve, Alan, and Larry. Thank you, all of you gentlemen, for contributing to the classic Airline Pilot Guy Fund. And then since the last episode, I have a new patron at patreon.com, Jeff Ward. So thank you for becoming a patron. If you want to find out what that's all about, again, head over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. All right. And guess what? Last episode, I was flagged again by YouTube for using, they say, this piece of music that is supposedly protected by copyright, although several companies claim to hold the copyright on it. And I think it's a bunch of, well, I can't say that word on the podcast because this is a family show. But whatever. I'm going to keep playing it, though. In fact, maybe next time I'll play a different version by the Manhattan Transfer. Might as well, if I'm going to get flagged, might as well, have some variety. Okay, anything else I want to talk about before we move on? No, I don't think so. So let's get on with the news. As I was taking a swig of Dr. Pepper, and it reminded me of some of the comments I received on my last YouTube video, because people can see what I'm doing while I'm playing these little sound clips. And during the last show, during one of those playing sound clips, I was drinking my water, but I had squirted some of that Mio stuff in there, that stuff that it has vitamins and sweetener and that kind of thing, makes your water, a little bit more special. And this particular flavor was like blueberry blast or something like that. And it's really, really a bright blue. And somebody said, drinking Windex, Jeff? It did look like Windex. And then the other comment was made that I should relax and not wear my pilot uniform all the time because it just looks uncomfortable. But on the other hand, I had somebody comment a few episodes back that it seems that the shows that I'm doing wearing my pilot uniform shirt with the epaulettes seem to get better or more views. Perhaps people see me in the uniform and they think, what's this idiot doing with a pilot uniform on? Let me listen and watch a little bit of that. But whatever, today I am wearing, just for the benefit of most of you out there who are just listening to me, I don't know if you can hear this or not, but I'm wearing a polo shirt, a green one. One of my favorite shirts. Part of my extensive wardrobe. Not. Okay, let us start with... Okay, remember last episode we talked about, I think it was last episode, up at Newark, the near miss or near collision, however you want to characterize it, between a Boeing 737, a United flight, and an ERJ, a Embraer regional jet. I think they were an express jet, I believe. I'm not sure. Maybe that was a United. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the FAA has stepped in and said that they have investigated the recent air traffic incident at Newark and has taken steps to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. They have stopped using runway 29 at Newark Liberty International Airport for arrivals when flights are departing on runway 4 right. That's according to FAA spokesperson Arlene Salak. Again, remember the two airplanes. One was coming in. Let's see. This is part of the NTSB report. The United 737 contacted the Newark Tower on the bridge visual approach to runway 29. The local controller instructed the pilot to follow a Boeing 717 ahead and cleared the pilot to land on runway 29. When the 717 was on short final, the local controller instructed the ERJ 145 pilot to line up and wait on runway 4 right. After the 717 crossed runway 4 right, the local controller cleared the ERJ 145 for takeoff. At that time, the Boeing 737 was about 3 miles from the runway 29 threshold. The ERJ 145 did not actually begin its takeoff roll until the 737 was about on a 1 mile final from the 29 threshold. That may have contributed, this is Jeff speaking, to, the controller may have had the assumption that because he gave that clearance earlier to that ERJ 145, it wasn't going to be a conflict, but apparently he wasn't looking at the window to see if the regional jet had actually begun the takeoff roll until, of course, it was too late. The local controller recognized that the spacing was insufficient and instructed the 737 to go around. He provided traffic advisories to both the 737 and the ERJ 145 pilots, instructed the ERJ 145 pilot to maintain visual separation, and he responded that he was going to keep the aircraft's nose down, and the 737 overflew the ERJ 145 at the intersection of runways 29 and 4 right. So they were virtually laterally in the same space, and vertically only 400 feet separated the two. Very, very close. And speaking of 400 feet, let's take a look at this incident. Where is it? Where did it go? There we go. I found it. Let's listen to this audio. This happened at Houston Intercontinental Airport.
I'm sorry, who was that ready now? 601, thank you. Turn right, right turn, heading 340, 340, runway 9, clear for takeoff.
The 340, clear for takeoff, runway 9er, United 601.
Okay. The tower controller has just given United 601 clearance for takeoff. They are on runway 9, so they're pointed to the east. And now you'd think if you're going to be given a heading of 340, that if you're already pointed east, 340, the shortest direction to turn to that heading would be a left turn. But he said very clearly that, and the United 601 flight read back a right turn heading 340. Now maybe he intended to give that instruction, I don't know, but this may be a contribution to this incident. So here they go, they're rolling down the runway, runway 9, and then as soon as they're airborne, they're going to turn right all the way around, almost a 270-degree turn to heading at 340. Meanwhile,
AC Christian United 437, turn left, left turn heading 135, runway 15 left, left takeoff.
15 left, clear for takeoff, 135 on the heading, United 437.
okay, 15 left. Okay, so that's pointed to the southeast. That the 15 left and 15 right are on the western side of the airport, so west of the east-west runway 927. And so he had just instructed another United flight to take off and, after airborne, hang a left into a southeasterly heading of 135. Okay, so just a slight turn off of 15 left.
United 601, sorry, what's your heading there?
United 601?
United 601, just stop your heading, stop the turn right there, sir.
Okay, we're heading 210 now.
United 437, turn right heading 180, sir, and maintain 3,000 there.
Stop, turn in right immediately, United 3.
United 601, stop your turn, stop your climb and stop your turn for United 601.
United 601 is descending for radar resolution.
United 601, roger that, sir. You were given a right to a 340 heading, and the aircraft now, he's at 2,600 feet indicator now, sir. It's not a factor for you. Continue that right turn to 360, please.
Okay, we'll be clear momentarily, and then we'll continue the turn.
All right, when you're ready to go, give me a 360 heading, sir.
360 heading.
United 437, maintain, actually continue climb via the city, can I use departure, and give me a 135 head, actually a 125 heading for United 437, 125.
3 for 4,000, we did get a TCAS climb out of that.
United 437, roger that, and let them know you're heading when you go to departure. Have a good flight, sir. United 601, amend your heading, they want you on a 270, now fly heading 270 for United 607, first United 601. United 601 heading 270.
Hey, United 601 heading due west.
United 601, thank you. Can I get you departure? Have a good one.
United 601.
Okay, that was edited by me. There were a lot of other communications to other airplanes in between all of those little entries, or whatever you want to say. And so that is compressed in time. So that's not real time, just so that you understand. But I thought it would be kind of boring to listen to all the other stuff going on. Sounds like this controller was distracted and very busy and wasn't paying close attention. I don't know. It could have been a mistake by the pilots. He did tell United 601 you were instructed to turn right heading 340. Seems to me that that's what they were doing. Maybe he wasn't turning, or they weren't turning as quickly as the tower controller expected them to. I don't know, but it seems from the onset of this that somebody taking off on 09 and given a heading to fly all the way around to the right to a 340 heading, and somebody cleared for takeoff on 15 left to turn left to heading 135 would naturally put those airplanes in each other's path. And that's what happened. And guess what? They missed each other by 400 feet vertically. And I don't know if you heard in one of the little excerpts there of the United 437. These are both A320s, by the way. Not that that makes any difference, but the United 437 flight, at one point, you could hear the TCAS system in the background saying, "Climb." And apparently the United 601 flight, the one that was going all the way around to 340, they received a resolution advisory as well, telling them to descend. So the TCAS system seems to have worked in this situation, and helped by the controller after seeing what was transpiring. And so again, another near miss, this time in Houston. And then finally, I believe we had one other near miss. Oh, and I wanted to mention this. We talked about this near miss, also involving a United flight. And a few weeks ago, the alleged, well, not alleged, the TCAS advisory, some people are calling it a near miss. I'm not sure if you could really correctly characterize that or not. I don't know all the details as far as how close they got to each other. Vertically, I think within about 600 feet, and but laterally, I'm not sure how close they were. But just wanted to point out a great analysis by Ben Granucci. He's the associate editor over at a great website, the nycaviation.com site. That stands for New York City Aviation.com. That's nycaviation.com. And Ben wrote a great analysis of this near collision out over the waters, Pacific Ocean, close to the Big Island of Hawaii. The name of the article is "The Reality Behind the Hawaii Near Collision." And so I recommend highly that you take a look at that. The link is right there in the show notes. So take a look and read what Ben had to say, and good stuff. So thanks, Ben, for contributing to our understanding of what happened with that, quote, near collision over the Pacific. All right, that's enough. It should be enough, shouldn't it, of near misses? Somebody else wrote in and said, "Hey, Jeff, you better be careful out there. Looks like controllers are not keeping track of everything lately, and we need to make sure that we are expressly or..." Man, I must be tired or something. It's I'd hope to start recording this podcast shortly after arriving here, around noon, 1 o'clock, somewhere in there. And the last 3 or 4 hours I've been preparing for this show. So I guess my body is telling me, because I can't come up with words, that I need to take a nap. But I'm not going to, because then I'm never going to get this thing recorded. So you'll just have to bear with me and my lack of vocabulary right now. So anyway, we need to be very vigilant out there as pilots and controllers to what's going on. This is a busy world we fly in, and we have to be paying attention. Okay. Oh, this is just amazing.
How dry I am. How dry I am.
This is just astonishing to me. Here's the headline: "A crackdown on airport drinking lessens air rage." Yes, a crackdown on passenger drinking at London's Gatwick Airport appears to have greatly reduced the number of alcohol-fueled in-flight incidents on one route to a popular party destination, a British leisure-focused airline says. The BBC reports Sussex police have launched an initiative to patrol Gatwick bars and restaurants, keeping an eye out for flyers who may be drinking excessively and could become disruptive once they board their flights. Duh. So far, the patrols have targeted areas near the gates for Monarch Airlines' late-night flights to Ibiza. Ibiza? A popular Spanish beach and party destination. Monarch and police say numerous Ibiza-bound passengers have started in-flight problems during the past few years after drinking to excess prior to their flights. Apparently, they're at the airport, drinking at the airport bars, and some of them are actually buying their alcohol at duty-free stores and starting to partake of them before they even board the flight. And so I'm glad to see that the crackdown on excessive drinking is having a positive effect on disorderly conduct on those flights. Oh, let's see. What can I say about that? Nothing. Okay. How about a Finnair Airbus A330-300 flying from Halifax, Nova Scotia to New York? I guess they had diverted to Halifax for some reason. Anyway, they're going into John F. Kennedy with 289 passengers, landed on John F. Kennedy's airport's runway 31 right, but touched down hard at 12:33 local. The aircraft rolled out with further incident, vacated the runway, and taxied to the terminal, with the crew maintaining routine communication. The return flight, Flight 6, needed to be canceled. The Aviation Herald learned that the aircraft received substantial damage. The main gear is going to be replaced. Whoa! I'd say that's substantial. If they have to replace the main gear, wow. The airline confirmed a hard landing requiring a thorough inspection of the aircraft. Therefore, the return flight needed to be canceled. Let's see, the weather conditions at the time. The winds were out of the north at 6 to 8 knots, gusting to about 26 knots. So yeah, there was some gusty wind there, but apparently the pilots didn't successfully navigate through the gusts.
Ted, that was probably the lousiest landing in the history of this airport.
I'm sorry, I had to play that. All right. We already talked about that. Oh, how about this one? The Lufthansa Airbus 321 at Vienna on May 24th. Was on short final to runway 11 with the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated when the aircraft encountered unexpected turbulence, causing a passenger to be lifted out of her seat and receiving injuries to her shoulder and spine, and a flight attendant to be hit and injured by objects lifting off as a result, or resulted in the injuries. The crew continued for a safe landing on Vienna's runway 11. The passenger was taken to a hospital, and the flight attendant was treated at the airport for minor injuries. The airline confirmed the occurrence, stating that the passenger had not fastened her seatbelt, although advised to do so.
Please remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt light is on. Right.
And even when it's not on, you should still be in your seat with your seatbelt fastened. And why somebody, and we've talked about this before, the Asiana flight in San Francisco, I believe every death there resulted from people that didn't have their seatbelts on. Maybe not everyone, but most of the ones that died, except for the one that maybe got run over by the fire truck. So, keep those seatbelts fastened, please. Here's an odd occurrence. This again from the Aviation Herald, an excellent website, avherald.com. A skipper's aviation de Havilland -8-300 was performing a charter flight from Kambalda to Perth in Western Australia with 4 crew and an unknown number of passengers. They were on approach to Perth, descending through 3,800 feet, when the crew observed bright strobes in front of their aircraft and realized that the object was tracking towards them. The crew took evasive action, turning the aircraft west to avoid a collision with the object. After being clear of conflict, the crew continued the approach to Perth for a safe landing. The Australian TSB, Transportation Safety Board, released their final report of their investigation terminated without formal conclusion reporting. Okay. So they terminated the investigation without a formal conclusion, and they reported that the object passed the -8 in about 20 meters laterally. 20 meters, that's what, about 70 feet? And 100 feet vertically. The crew reported that the object was cylindrical in shape and gray in color and was flying at 3,700 feet MSL. There was no TCAS indication or advisory. The Australian TSB reported that the aircraft was in military-restricted airspace. The Air Force did not operate unmanned aerial vehicles at that time and were not aware of any such objects in their area. A little suspicious, isn't it? That they just decided, well, we're not going to really investigate this anymore, and we don't know what it was, and so good luck out there. I'm thinking, maybe it could have been a flying car? I don't know. All right. And, well, not finally. Almost finally. The latest on the Malaysian Flight 370. They just released a day or two ago the data, the satellite data from Inmarsat. And they released 45 pages of raw satellite data. And I thought in the article I was reading, this was an interesting paragraph. But at least one independent expert said his initial impression was that the communication logs didn't include key assumptions, algorithms, and metadata needed to validate the investigation team's conclusions that the plane flew south after dropping off radar screens 90 minutes into the flight. Michael Exner, a satellite engineer who has been intensively researching the calculations, said, "It's a whole lot of stuff that's not very important to know. There are probably 2 or 3 pages of important stuff. The rest is just noise. It doesn't add any value to our understanding." Okay, and then today, the Australia Joint Aviation Coordination Center announced that the Bluefin 1 has completed the search within the defined area of 850 square miles without locating debris. They said no signs of aircraft debris have been found by the autonomous underwater vehicle since it joined the search effort, and later stated the Australian Transport Safety Bureau has advised that the search in the vicinity of the acoustic detections can now be considered complete, and in its professional judgment, the area can now be discounted as the final resting place of Malaysian Flight 370. They said that activities continue to locate the aircraft in 3 areas. Number 1, the first activity: review all existing satellite and radar data to define and I think it's 60,000 square mile search area in the South Indian Ocean. Number 2, a bathymetric survey to map the ocean floor, which has already begun and is estimated to take 3 months. And 3, acquisition of specialist help to search the ocean floor. The search on the ocean floor is going to commence in August and is estimated to take about 12 months. So we're hoping that during this time everybody will lose interest in this and then we can just move on. I guess that's what they're saying. So I don't know about you, but I'm still not sure that this thing actually took that southern arc, and I'm not so sure that it actually crashed into the ocean. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of this whole thing. There are a lot of things that kind of helped arouse my suspicion about some no good stuff going on here. So I don't know. And finally, British Airways, granted a BBC documentary crew unprecedented access for a new series, A Very British Airline, to broadcast next week. It airs starting Monday, June 2nd, on BBC Two. The cameras film a training session dealing with medical emergencies, attended by applicants hoping to join the airline's cabin crew. The lead trainer says that that managing a fresh corpse during a flight is a, quote, gray area. She tells the trainees, "You cannot put a dead passenger in the toilet. It's not respectful, and it's not strapped in for landing." She goes on to say, if they slid off the toilet, they would end up on the floor. You would have to take the aircraft apart to get that person out. Imagine putting someone in the aircraft toilet. She admits that the airline used to simply prop up dead passengers in their seats and pretend that they were asleep. It's what we used to do many years ago. Give them vodka and a tonic, give them a vodka and tonic, a Daily Mail, and eye shades, and they were like, they're fine. We don't do that. She explains, in a nice, easy world where someone dying on an aircraft isn't, you put them back on seats. I know a crew member who had to sit next to someone who passed away, and for the rest of the flight. All of this is such a horrible topic. Cabin crew should tuck a blanket right up to the neck if they are required to place a corpse on a seat. Airlines advise against placing bodies in the toilet because there have been cases where rigor mortis has set in and the body could not be removed from the confined space. It is common practice for a deceased passenger to be moved to an empty seat if available in first class or business class, or brought to a crew rest area and laid down and covered. If there is no space available, the dead passenger may simply be strapped in more tightly with efforts to cover the passenger up, usually out of view of other passengers. Again, the documentary is called A Very British Airline, and it airs Monday, June 2nd on BBC Two at 9 p.m. Yeah, I did that. Sorry.
Captain, incoming message.
All right, now, time for the best part of the show, your feedback. Ray starts off by saying, I'm giving you a meandering set of questions with a very big grin. He said, best line ever in a podcast. I guess he's quoting me. The airplane's lifting devices, we call them wings. Well, they do. That's what they call those lifting devices. Anyway, on the subject of icing, you mentioned that on the Mad Dog, the leading edges of the wings and vertical stabilizer have hot air anti-icing. What happens to this air? Is it vented at the end of the wing and fin, or is it bled out continuously along the leading edge to flow over the surface behind it? If it is vented at the end, what stops ice buildup behind the heated leading edge, similar to the ice buildup behind the boots of the American Eagle flight you mentioned? Okay, let me try to tackle that one. You know what? I'm not actually sure what happens to that air. I think it goes aft of where the air is heating the leading edge devices, or maybe it does vent toward the end. I don't know. That's a good question. I'll need to look that up. I thought I knew the answer to this question before I read it, but I don't. So, good one. You stumped me, Ray. I'll hope to have an answer for that in a future episode. Or, if you're listening out there and you know the answer, send me it, please. I need help. Okay, when you talked about the Air Florida 737 crash at DCA, you referred to the EPR, that's exhaust pressure ratio. For anyone interested, there is, in his humble opinion, an excellent article on EPR versus N1 at, and this is from theflyingengineer.com. I'll have the link in the show notes. And the diagrams there are really good at describing the parts of a jet engine and the source of the measurements. So, do you fly by EPR or N1? Well, mainly EPR or EPR, but we back it up with also cross-referencing N1. So when we're on takeoff, we set our power using the EPR gauges, and then we go down a couple gauges and look to make sure that the N1s are within the range that you expect them to be based on that particular engine and that power setting, etc. And of course, it's going to depend on the atmospheric conditions, etc. But we have a general range where the N1s should be, somewhere around 88-90% or so for a reduced thrust takeoff, and that should be another setting for normal power, etc. And then those numbers are going to be different for the MD-90 high bypass engines. And so we're always cross-checking that, mainly because of that accident, the 737 Air Florida crash at DCA. And so that's my answer, mostly referencing EPR but backing it up with N1. And then he says, Ray says, on the subject of jet engines, there is a neat thread at airliners.net in their forums on the long startup time of the Rolls-Royce BR715 engines on an AirTran 717. As far as I know, the MD-88 has Pratt & Whitney engines, and the 90 has the V2500s. You are correct, sir. Do either of these require a longer air blow during startup when they're hot, like the BR715? If so, does this pose any restrictions, such as a time delay on an air start after a flameout? Well, to answer your first question, yes. Almost every jet engine that I have operated on since I've been flying, if you are starting engines and it's a hot day or the engine has been previously started, we look for a certain temperature, exhaust gas temperature, EGT, below a certain value, because if you try to start the engine with the exhaust gas temperature above a certain point, you're almost guaranteed to have a hot start. You know, there are parameters that you have to watch when you're starting an engine, especially when you're manually starting an engine. Now, today's modern engines, like the engines on the MD-90, the V2528s, and the Boeing 717s, Rolls-Royce engines, and most jets out there now have these automatic start cycles that are continuously monitoring various parameters during the start, and they will auto-abort the start if they see that something is going to be exceeded or is exceeded. But yes, you have to be very careful about the temperature, especially if you're doing a manual start like the Pratt & Whitneys on the MD-80 series. We have to make sure that the exhaust gas temperature is below that certain value so that we don't have a hot start and exceed the temperature limits. So what we do is we just keep motoring the engine, so it's spinning out there with the compressed, the bleed air is spinning the engine around and around and around and around and around, and then you're watching the exhaust gas temperature go down and go down and go down, and then when it's below a certain value, then it's safe to turn the ignition on, and that's when the fuel, air, and ignition is all introduced into the engine, and then you hopefully have a nice, maybe not a cool start, but at least a start that will not exceed the EGT parameters. And again, as I said, the engines that use an automatic start cycle, you don't have to worry about it because they kind of do everything on their own. I mean, you do have to worry about it, but you don't have to pay as close attention as you would if you were manually starting the engine. Again, because they have all these sensors and they're looking at all these parameters, and if something looks like it's going to be exceeded, it'll go ahead and initiate a self-abort. So I hope that answered that question about EGT. And your second part of the question, does it pose any restrictions such as a time delay on an air start after a flameout? Well, an air start, I assume you're referring to in flight, if you had a flameout, and would you have to honor a certain temperature in flight before you attempted an air start? And as far as I know, no. Your major concern at that point is not over-temping the engine, but just getting it started so it will produce thrust again for you, so you can keep flying. So that would be my answer, and I hope that I'm right about that. So, of course, the checklist will guide you through all of that, and if there are any restrictions, it would point that out to you. Thanks, Ray, as always, for your questions. Always good to hear from you. Olaf writes, enjoy your videos on YouTube regarding the pilot shortage. I'm a 9-year regional captain who has been out 2 years on medical disability. I may be able to return, but due to the terrible downward spiral in the regional industry because of the whipsaw, I am considering just staying out, keeping my long-term disability, and starting another career. Most regionals treat their pilots like minimum wage workers. Yeah, sadly, you're right. American is demanding more concessions after already imposing bankruptcy concessions from their regional American Eagle. Of course, now it's Envoy. Eagle's pilot said no, and now are losing airplanes. My Acme carrier has demanded the same from us, and our group has said no and is now going to lose aircraft. It now takes 1,500 or 1,000 hours for certain individuals to be eligible to fly 121, yet pay is still $20,000 to $30,000 a year. $30,000 is the max offered by only one regional. I make about $80,000 per year, more when the company fouls up and offers 200% pay. You can take a 2-year course from a community college plus 6 months internship and start at $60,000 per year as a radiology technician. An aviation education now costs $150,000 for a $20,000 per year job. Do you have any opinion on this supposed shortage causing the majors to bring back the regional flying in-house? Thanks. Again, that's Olaf. My opinion. Well, I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, Olaf, but it seems to me that it would be a logical conclusion to eventually see the major airlines starting to do all the flying, all the flying that they contract out with the regional airlines now just to do it in-house. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. I think most of us believe that that's the way to go, like have everybody on the same seniority list for that particular carrier. I don't know if it's going to go that way or what's going to happen with the regional airline aspect of the Part 121 industry here in the United States. I think that would be the best way to go, but who knows? I'm certainly no aviation expert as far as that is concerned. But yeah, I see what you're saying, man. Going to a community college for 2 years and 6 months of internship and starting off with $60,000 per year as a radiology technician. And you don't have to worry about thunderstorms, do you? Thanks, Olaf. Marlon says, my question to you is mostly related to the recent increase in the required flight hours to become a first officer for a U.S. regional airline, or any airline for that matter, Marlon. It was said that the objective of increasing the required flight time was to improve the level of safety within the airline industry. In hindsight, this seems to be a good idea, and I agree that experience can be very valuable. What puzzles me, though, is the fact that in some parts of the world, young pilots can be hired with as little as 250 hours to fly turboprops or regional jets, and safety is hardly called into question. In fact, some of the airlines that still do this have an excellent safety record, and it isn't uncommon to find young first officers flying Airbus 320s or 737s. Excuse me. In other regions, one can also join an airline-sponsored pilot cadet program, which takes an individual from 0 time to the right seat of an A320 in as little as 18 months. The selection process and the quality of the training provided by these airlines are second to none, and it makes you wonder whether the airline industry should simply focus on improving quality of their training programs rather than requiring a higher amount of flight time, since quantity does not always equate to having the best quality. What do you think? Do you think that we are better off by requiring more flight time? Or should the aviation industry focus on improving the quality of their training programs? Well, I guess I don't know if it's the best answer, but perhaps the solution is both. Definitely increasing the quality of the training programs. And in this line of business, the airline business, the flying business, more experience usually equates, not always, but usually equates to, you've learned more. You've been flying, you've experienced more things, and I think that the longer you've been around, remember the old saying, there are old pilots and bold pilots, but no old, bold pilots. Bold meaning maybe not so great judgment, decision-making skills. I don't know. So there is some truth to that. But if you had to pick one or the other, which one would be better? And I see where you're going with that. Now you could look back and say, Well, the safety record of all airlines, both majors and regionals, over time has been getting better and better and better. And there are just some isolated incidents where a lack of experience and or quality training caused an accident, like the Colgan crash up in Buffalo, New York. And I could see where you could make an argument that requiring more flying time is not going to, in that case, I think you could make a really good argument that it wasn't due to the fact that this captain had low flying time, because he didn't. The problem in this case was mainly because he just wasn't very good. He had had a record of check ride busts from his previous training before he got hired by an airline, and then I think at a previous airline, and even while at Colgan, he was having trouble with his training progress and his check rides. And perhaps that was somewhere along the line somebody should have said, you know what, you're a great guy and all, but you just don't have what it takes to be a pilot. My co-pilot and I on this trip were discussing this particular feedback, Marlon, and he said, Jeff, I was pretty much a zero-time pilot before I started pilot training in the Air Force. And then I thought to myself, and I've mentioned this before on this show, that basically I was too. Before I went off to officer training school and the flight screening program, I had about 3.5 hours in my logbook. And then after the flight screening program in the Air Force, before I started undergraduate pilot training, UPT, I maybe got another 20 hours. So I probably had less than 25 hours in my logbook before I started flying in the T-37 jet trainer. So you could say that I was a zero-time to fully qualified Air Force jet pilot, within that year after undergraduate pilot training. So, and you could definitely make the argument, I don't think anybody could argue that military training is not high-quality training. It's very high-quality training. And the point that we were making, or we kind of came to in our discussion today, was that the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army, they don't have any problem at all with washing out people that just don't make the cut. If you don't have what it takes to get your wings, they're not going to carry you through. Okay, which is not always the case in the civilian world, because we've got a lot of people out there who are flight instructors who depend upon students to pay them their hourly rate to be trained. And if you're washing people out, then you're basically eliminating your source of income, essentially. And so I think that there's more of a tendency on the non-military training, non-military training, to maybe carry on people that probably shouldn't be encouraged to continue. I don't know. That's just a guess. What do you think? Those of you who have, maybe some of you have experience both with military and civilian training, and perhaps some of you have just civilian training. Maybe many of you are, I know many of you are certified flight instructors. What do you think? Do you think that might be part of the problem, that in the civilian world that training isn't always washing out the people that it should, that just don't really have what it takes? I think there are several weaknesses all around as far as, getting qualified people into airline cockpits. And we need to maybe tighten up on our training, make it higher quality, as Marlon says, and perhaps take another look at what should be a requirement for hours in your logbook. So that's you make a good argument, Marlon. I don't know really where the answer lies, but that's some good feedback. Thank you. All right, looks like I'm going to have to take a break because my iPad is telling me that it's almost full and everything is about to shut down over there on the iPad. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Okay, I'm back. Did you miss me? I hope so. I missed you. Disco. Yeah, I grew up in the disco era in the 70s. And you know what? Many of you make fun of it, but it was a lot of fun. Just think of Captain Jeff dancing under that disco ball, listening to the DJ spin those. Speaking of DJ writes, hope all is well. I have recently started listening to podcasts and have found my way to this one. I love aviation, and the insight you provide is pretty neat. As a frequent business traveler, you have eased some of my concerns with flight. Anyway, a couple of questions for you. Recently, an aircraft you pilot had an engine rollback at altitude. See the link below, and he's linked me over to the Aviation Herald. I saw that. When you have a chance, can you discuss this? Okay, it was a flight. Here, let me click on this. I don't remember exactly where it was coming from. I think they were going from Tampa to Cincinnati and somewhere south of Tallahassee, Florida, 70 nautical miles to the southeast. The right-hand engine, a Pratt & Whitney JT-8D, rolled back uncommandedly and prompting the crew to drift the aircraft down to flight level 260. And after working checklists, they made the decision to divert to Tallahassee. The crew advised approach that the engine had rolled back but had not been shut down and was still running. They landed on Tallahassee's runway 18 about 25 minutes after leaving 32,000 feet. Following repairs, the aircraft was able to continue the flight and reached Cincinnati's Northern Kentucky Airport with a delay of 4 hours. Okay, so what happened? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what happened. My guess would be that the fuel control unit on that engine just started messing up. I don't know what was involved. If it was an electronic thing or a mechanical thing or whatever, but it sounds to me like the fuel control just decided that I'm not going to give you as much fuel as you're demanding with your throttle, but I'm not going to shut down completely either. So in this case, yeah, it's not good to have an engine that is not producing the thrust that it should be, but on the other hand, at least it's producing some. So if I hear anything more about that, DJ, I'll let you know, but I don't know what happened there. But again, I'm just guessing a faulty fuel control unit, and they most likely replaced it and were on their way after doing an engine run and making sure that it was going to work okay. I tell you, if you're going to have an engine failure, probably not the best place. The best place to have an engine failure is while you're on the ground, but maybe second best is when you're at cruise or descent, when you really don't need all the thrust necessary to maintain flight. You know, we drift down to an altitude that is going to work with a single engine operation, and then decide what our next course of action is going to be, which is, of course, landing at as soon as conditions permit at a suitable location. Okay, number 2, the second question that DJ has for me. I'm currently 23 with a BA in Legal Studies and Criminal Justice. I work as a corporate auditor for a company I won't mention. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for becoming an auditor for a major airline? American, Delta, Southwest, etc. I'd prefer safety and network auditing rather than the financial groups. Again, thanks for taking time out to discuss these topics. And DJ thinks that the longer the podcast, the better, in his book. Thanks, DJ, for your feedback. And to answer your second question about trying to get on with an airline, I would just give them a call, put in your resume, try to contact somebody. I don't know. I don't know who you would contact at the corporate levels of the airlines that you mentioned. But I would just try to contact somebody there and say, hey, I have this background and I have some experience as a corporate auditor, and I love flying, and I think that you and me would be a good match. But if anybody else has a suggestion for DJ, send it to me and I'll pass it on to him. Okay, Chris sent me some audio feedback. Let's take a listen to what Chris had to say.
Hello, Captain Jeff. When you were discussing pressurization and cockpit windows, I came up with a question. Have you ever been on an aircraft with a depressurization incident that actually dropped the masks? How often does this happen in the U.S. fleet or Acme each year? Even just an equipment failure instead of a balloon failure?
Well, it's never happened to me, Chris. Thank you for your audio feedback. But I can't say that I've never been on an airplane or piloting an airplane that has not had the masks drop. But it had nothing to do with depressurization. The 727, the Boeing 727, I love that airplane, but she was a beast to land at times, and some people would say almost all times. And if you didn't do it just right, and you were landing in just a little bit of a crab, it would bend the cabin or the fuselage just enough so that the doors that keep the oxygen masks stowed would open up, and then you would have an orchard, an orange orchard back in the back of the airplane. And we used to call it an orchard because if you opened the door and looked back there and you saw all those yellow, orange oxygen masks all down, hanging down, it did look like it was some kind of an orchard. And I've done that once or twice on the 727. Again, it didn't have anything to do with depressurization. But decompression incidents are not uncommon on military and civilian aircraft. And according to this Wikipedia article that I quickly referenced, approximately 40 to 50 rapid decompression events occur worldwide annually. In the majority of cases, the problem is relatively manageable for the aircrew. Consequently, where passengers in the aircraft do not suffer any ill effects, the incidents tend not to be considered notable. Injuries resulting from decompression incidents are rare. And I think that another article I was reading said that, in fact, there are probably many decompression incidents that occur but are not reported. So you could probably multiply that 40 to 50 rapid decompression events worldwide by a certain factor. Probably, I would guess probably a factor of 2 to 3, maybe at least. So that's just a guess. I don't know if there's any definitive data on the number of depressurization events worldwide. And I'm going to put a link to this article in the show notes, another Wikipedia article about cabin pressurization. I thought it was kind of interesting. I'll read a little bit of it to you. The first airliner with a pressurized cabin was a Boeing 307 Stratoliner built in 1938, prior to World War II, though only 10 were produced. The 307's pressure compartment was from the nose of the aircraft to a pressure bulkhead in the aft just forward of the horizontal stabilizer. And that's pretty much the case now, even in today's modern aircraft. World War II was a catalyst for aircraft development. Initially, the piston aircraft of World War II, though they often flew at very high altitudes, were not pressurized and relied on oxygen masks. Of course, these are military airplanes and didn't have passengers that had to wear oxygen masks. This became impractical with the development of larger bombers where crew were required to move about the cabin, and this led to the first bomber with cabin pressurization, though they were restricted to crew areas. The Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. The control system for this was designed by Garrett Air Research Manufacturing Company. Drawing in part on licensing of patents held by the Boeing for the Stratoliner. Post-war piston airliners, I talk about some other piston airliners with pressurization like the Lockheed Constellation, the Connie, the Douglas DC-6, the Douglas DC-7, and the world's first commercial airliner was the British de Havilland Comet in 1949, designed with a service ceiling of 36,000 feet, or 11,000 meters if you prefer. It was the first time that a large diameter pressurized fuselage with windows had been built and flown at this altitude. Initially, the design was very successful, but two catastrophic airframe failures in 1954 resulting in the total loss of the aircraft, passengers, and crew, grounded what was then the entire world jet airliner fleet. Extensive investigation and groundbreaking engineering analysis of the wreckage led to a number of very significant engineering advances that solved the basic problems of pressurized fuselage design at altitude. The critical problem proved to be a combination of inadequate understanding of the effect of progressive metal fatigue as the fuselage undergoes repeated stress cycles, coupled with a misunderstanding of how aircraft skin stresses are redistributed around openings in the fuselage, such as windows and rivet holes. The critical engineering principles concerning metal fatigue learned from the Comet 1 program were applied directly to the design of the Boeing 707 in 1957 and all subsequent jet airliners. One immediately noticeable legacy of the Comet disasters is the oval windows on every jet airliner. The metal fatigue cracks that destroyed the Comets were initiated by the small radius corners on the Comet 1's almost square windows. The Comet fuselage was redesigned, and the Comet 4 in 1958 went on to become a successful airliner, pioneering the first transatlantic jet service. But the program never really recovered from these disasters and was overtaken by the Boeing 707. And then they go on to talk about the Concorde, which had to deal with unusually high pressure differentials because it flew at unusually high altitudes, up to 60,000 feet, or 18,000 meters, and maintained a cabin altitude of 6,000 feet. This made the aircraft significantly heavier and contributed to the high cost of a flight. The Concorde also had smaller cabin windows than most other commercial passenger aircraft in order to slow the rate of decompression if a window failed. The high cruising altitude also required the use of high-pressure oxygen and demand valves at the emergency masks, unlike the continuous flow masks used in conventional airliners. All right, so there we have a little bit about depressurizations. Thanks, Chris, for your question. Kevin writes in and says, thanks for your wonderful podcast. I always enjoy listening. As a flight simulator enthusiast, I enjoy learning about real-world piloting technique. My question is regarding published procedures versus ATC instructions. I know that you follow published procedures for departures and arrivals and typically have those programmed into your flight management computer. My question is, how often do controllers ask you to deviate from a published procedure? Is this common, or is it only for a special circumstance, like weather or traffic avoidance? For example, one of the things most frustrating for me is to program an arrival procedure and then get something totally different from the approach controller. And in the situation I just mentioned, would you normally fly the airplane manually using the mode control panel and ignore the planned route? Or is it more common to override the waypoints in the CDU to create a custom flight path? I've always wondered about the proper procedure. Typically, I will fly the plane using manual control of the autopilot but leave the route alone. The route then becomes just a visual reference and is still available if I need to join the route again. Not sure if I'm doing this right or not. Thanks for your comment. Your insights are always illuminating. Happy landings, Kevin. Great question, Kevin. And let me tell you what happens in the real world. I can't go through every possible scenario, but just some typical ones that come to mind. We do, as you said, have our departure standard instrument departure procedure in the computer. And then we have the en route plan, the jet routes, and then the standard arrival procedure, the STAR. And then a lot of times I will be transitioning to an approach procedure, usually some kind of an ILS or RNAV approach at the arrival airport. There are many reasons for you to alter your computed programmed flight path, and you mentioned a couple. I'm looking out the window right now at an airplane that is, looks like they're on some kind of, I'm guessing maybe a base turn for landing at Bradley International. Really cool. Oh well. Sorry, I'm easily distracted, especially when it comes to airplanes in the sky. And I think many of you are probably suffer from that as well. So I know you do because you told me you have, or you do. Okay, so back to, yeah, so we're flying along, and there's traffic that you need to avoid, and so air traffic control could say, Acme so-and-so fly heading 030. Okay, so you go to heading select, and you turn to the heading that was commanded by ATC. And in this case, you're not going to change anything in your flight management computer because you know that when you're finished with that traffic vector, that they are going to give you either another vector to rejoin your course, or more likely than not, they'll give you a direct to one of the points further on in your route. And then from that point, you just follow the previously programmed route. Same thing with deviating for weather avoidance. You ask for and hopefully receive a vector to deviate around a storm system. And then when you're finished, either they'll tell you, okay, Acme, you're cleared to deviate up to 15 degrees right of course, direct the so-and-so point after you're finished deviating, and please advise. They'll usually say something like that so they can kind of keep aware of what you're doing out there. And so you've done your deviation, and then you're clear of the weather, and then you're going direct to that point downrange from where you were navigating before the deviation. And then you tell them we are now direct to, whatever the point is, whether it be a navigational aid or an intersection, a waypoint. Now, when it happens in the and sometimes when you're traveling, let's say from Atlanta up to the northern seaboard, as I did earlier today, they may want to send you to a point that takes you a little bit more directly, further down your projected route. And so you just punch that into the computer, and then that just draws a straight line from where you are at that moment to that point, and you're still navigating using the flight management system or computer. Now, when you get into the approach environment, your transition from the en route environment to the approach environment, that's one of those things that you're never really quite sure. If you're on a standard arrival procedure and they give you a vector, sometimes they'll say, I'm going to give you this heading and then expect to resume the arrival. And that's always a nice thing, so that you don't go, you don't assume that because I'm on this heading, I'm not going to be rejoining that arrival, and I'm just going to completely eliminate that out of my flight management computer and just leave the approach procedure in the computer. Sometimes you do that, and then all of a sudden they'll clear you back to another point that was on that arrival procedure that you just deleted. So if you're not sure, most people will just leave the arrival procedure in there, and then when it's clear that you're going to be on vectors from that point to intercept the final approach course, then you can go ahead and clean everything up and continue on with just the approach procedure. And we usually extend off of a certain point, so it's a nice straight magenta line that is displayed on your navigational map. And then you just get the vectors for your ILS or RNAV approach or whatever it is that they're vectoring you for, and then you're good to go. So that's one of those things where, again, with experience and into certain locations, like in Atlanta, when I'm starting to get vectors, I kind of have an idea that from that point on, I'm not going to be asked to, go back to another point on the arrival and proceed with the arrival procedure. You kind of figure that at this point you're not going to rejoin the arrival anymore, and you can just delete it. But if you're not sure, just leave it in there, as you say, as a reference. And then when it's very clear to you, or you can even ask them, hey, are you going to have us, rejoin the arrival, or are we going to be vectored from this point on? And then they'll tell you what their plan is. So that's again, great questions. Let's see. Let me make sure that I answered all of them, Kevin. Yeah, the big thing for me is that when you're using a modern airplane with a flight management computer or flight management system, that you don't get your head down and locked inside your cockpit, because most of the time your flight management computer display head and input device is not in your field of vision looking out the window. It's somewhere down in the console, either the center console or whatever. And that is probably the worst place for both pilots' heads to be when you're in an arrival area or approach corridor or whatever you want to call it, because the airplanes are getting closer to you and they're becoming more and more numerous. Everything is getting converging together, and this is the environment where there's a reason, I always say this, that if you look at airplanes and the way the instruments are designed and the way the mode control panels are set up, for the most part, and I'm not talking about some of the older ones like the 727, but let's say more modern airplanes made in the last 20 to 30 years, the autopilot mode control panel is up there on the glare shield. And why do you think that is? It's up there because it's in your field of vision, but to look out the windscreen and clear for other airplanes. So you just lift up your hand and you make your changes to the mode control panel of your autoflight system up there on the glare shield. There's a reason that they put it up there and not down in the center console where you have your heads down, because that's the worst place for your heads to be in an approach environment. You want them up and out. And I can say something that would not be family friendly, so I'm not going to. So the idea, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, especially when we first started getting this automation, and I still see it, guys and gals, guys, being the generic term for pilots, want to build the approach. They get something that's not programmed already in there, and they have their heads down and they're doing all this fancy stuff with the automation and making their picture look really friendly on their navigational display, instead of just flying the darn airplane and keeping their heads outside of the airplane and looking around and clearing for things. And that's dangerous. And we need to resist doing that kind of thing, unless it's just absolutely essential that you do it. Some people would say, well, yeah, Jeff, but this, when I rebuild everything and I clean all this stuff up and then it gives me a vertical path and all that kind of stuff, and I think, well, you could use your brain, and how far you are away from a certain point and where you have to be at that point as far as an altitude is concerned. And then if you just multiply that by 3, then you can kind of decide, how much distance it's going to take me to, the 3-to-1 thing. And it's not complicated. It doesn't require a calculator. All it takes is just some of your brain cells, not a lot, just a few, to do this mental calculation. And that way, you can keep your head up, looking outside, using your mode control panel, and not your head up and locked down on that navigational display. And the other thing that's really funny, it's human nature. Anytime one of the pilots starts punching in things into the flight management computer, 9 times out of 10, the other pilot have their heads down as well, watching you punch things into your keyboard and into your flight management computer. Same thing with the ACAR system. Every single time I reach down to pull up some information on the ACARS or type in some information to the dispatcher or whatever, the guy that I'm flying with looks down too. So here we are, careening through the skies. Usually, the autopilot's on and you're at cruise altitude or something, or everything's stabilized and it's not that critical. But still, it's funny to me. I kind of chuckle, inwardly all the time because I put my head down to do something with the ACAR system, and I can see with my peripheral vision the other pilot looking to see what I'm doing. And I make a big effort that when my first officer is using the ACAR system with something, I don't automatically look down and say, "What are you doing?" Like I got to watch what you're doing. I always resist that temptation. Same thing with that box. We'll be flying around. It's my leg. We're getting vectors for something. Hey, Jeff, do you want me to put this and that? And I said, do whatever you want with that. I don't care. I'm not looking at that. I'm looking outside. I'm on vectors. I don't need anything to be changed in that box because I'm not looking at any of that stuff anymore. I'm using my brain. So that's just something that you might want to keep in mind for those of you out there flying modern airplanes with flight management computers. Don't get so focused on and distracted by that box. I know it does wonderful things, but it's not everything, and you could get in trouble. That's all I'll say about that. And just a reminder, please watch, if you haven't already, Children of the Magenta. Just do a search on YouTube, Children of the Magenta. That's a great video to watch. Okay. Tom sent some audio feedback. Let's hear what Tom has to say.
Hey, Captain Jeff, Tom from Columbia, Missouri, and appreciate your podcast as always, and I had a couple of questions for you. I'm right in the middle of listening to episode 117, and really appreciated your information that you shared with us on turbulence at the beginning of your podcast there. I wanted to share a story about a flight I was just on a little over a week ago, coming into St. Louis, and we got in about midnight, really late flight, a lot of thunderstorms in the area. The captain told us that we would be coming through a lot of rough air, and he definitely was not kidding about that. We got into some very severe turbulence. When I spoke to the captain after the flight was over, he acknowledged that it was severe turbulence. I have flown hundreds of times over the years, and I don't ever recall being in turbulence like we were in on that flight. I can honestly tell you that I was scared during that turbulence. It lasted about 15 minutes, and it just felt like it was never going to end. And as you described in your latest podcast, things were being thrown around the cabin. I've also never been on a flight where people inside the plane were scared, and there were a few people that were literally screaming and I think scared for their lives. What made it worse was we had a missed approach. We had a pretty low ceiling, and we had a missed approach coming in the first time, and I think there was some major wind shifting because when he came around the second time, we actually came in from the other direction. I got a chance to talk to the captain after we landed, and he did acknowledge, as I said, that it was severe turbulence that we were in. And I had asked him if you knew that turbulence was that severe, would you have flown into it? And he said, absolutely not. He said the pilot reports that we had ahead of us did not indicate the turbulence was that strong, and he acknowledged that he would have not flown into that had he known how it was going to be. So it brought up a couple other questions with me that I didn't think about at the time when I was talking to him, but I did ask him if he was nervous during that time. He wouldn't acknowledge he was nervous, but he did tell me that he was right on the edge of his comfort zone. So my questions are for you. I'm sure over the years you've been in severe turbulence at some point. Have you ever doubted your equipment? When you're getting pounded like that, have you ever wondered if the structural integrity of that airplane was going to hold up? Has that ever been in the back of your mind? Obviously, there's nothing you can do about it. You're in it. You got to get through it. Whatever you do to get out of it, that's I'm sure all you're thinking of. But I just wondered if you ever had that in the back of your mind as a consideration, you know, wondering if the integrity of the airplane was going to hold together. And then the second part of that is when you go through a turbulent, severe turbulence like that, what are the guidelines as far as having that plane looked at? Does it need to be checked out from an airframe mechanic before it goes back on another flight? Does it have to be inspected to see that the structural integrity of that airplane is sound? So those are just a couple things I wanted to follow up on after your great information that you gave us. Thanks again for your podcast. I always enjoy it. And as always, Captain Jeff, wish you clear skies. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tom, for that great feedback. And yeah, you know, it could have been that the characterization of the turbulence was mischaracterized by the previous crew, and it's also possible that that it actually changed within that time frame of the airplane ahead of you making it through that area, and then when you're going through that area. That does happen. And I have been on flights riding in the back where we've hit some roller coasters and people are screaming like they're on a roller coaster, you know, probably fearing for their lives. Have I ever doubted my equipment? No. And as you say, well, it really wouldn't do any good anyway, would it? Because you're along for the ride regardless of what happens. But that's why we make every effort, I especially do, to avoid getting anywhere near an area where you're going to even, you know, slightly think that you're going to encounter something bad. You know, that's why I give a lot of space between, if I can, you know, severe weather. And it's just because once you get into that, there's not much you can do but just hang on to something and hope that it doesn't last too long. You mentioned in your feedback, Tom, that you were in it for almost 15 minutes. That must have seemed like an eternity. I can't imagine being in severe turbulence for that long. But no, I never have. I ever. It was interesting what you if he was nervous or scared going through that, and his comment on just about on the edge of his comfort zone, I would translate that to mean he was scared to death, and he was probably hanging on to that yoke, hoping that they'd get through that soon. Because again, I'm not that person, but has Captain Jeff ever been in pretty bad stuff and was scared? Yes, I have. And that's why I respect Mother Nature so much. So that's just interesting. You know, we don't want to say, oh yeah, I was frightened to death, because we don't want people out there to think that the people operating these airplanes are just mere mortals, you know, but we are. And not only, you know, are we experiencing the same thing you're experiencing back in the back, but we have the responsibility for all of you in the back, and I take that responsibility very seriously. And I have a lot of concern over what people are feeling in the back, and I certainly don't want anybody on my airplane screaming in the back, especially if it had anything to do with what I was doing or the decision that I made. So, yeah, interesting experience. Sorry you had to go through that, but yes, in one's career, you are likely to experience something like that once or twice or so. Let's see. When you go through severe turbulence, what all is entailed or required for an aircraft inspection? Now, maybe some of the mechanics that are listening can back me up with this or give me more detailed information. Mechanic Bob, calling Mechanic Bob. But I believe that an airframe mechanic will be required to do an inspection. And I think what they're looking for is they'll do a really, really good inspection of all of the aircraft fuselage skin and where the wings, abut the fuselage, and, you know, the control surfaces and that kind of thing, to look for any signs of bending or ripples in the skin, any signs of overstress. Probably, you know, pay close attention to the Well, I don't know if they'd really pay that close attention to landing gear, especially if you had the gear up. I wouldn't imagine that's something that they would look at. That would be more for like a hard landing. That's what I would assume that they would be looking for. But again, you mechanics out there, why don't you send me some help there and let me know what exactly is looked at and looked for in one of these severe turbulence encounters, as far as an inspection is concerned, to say that the airplane is airworthy and safe to fly, which I think is the same thing. I don't know why I said both. So thanks for your feedback, Tom, on your turbulent flight, and I hope that you have clear sailing from here on out. Okay, Brian writes, can you speak to how... No, I can't. To how a modern airliner would fly differently with a computer failure. Okay. This is... Let me see if I can find the actual audio that I actually... What did I do with that? Okay, I'm going to have to go over here. I forgot to put it in this news item. So let me just hang in there. We're going to get it here very, very shortly. Anyway, there was an American Airlines MD-83 flight 1461 that left Little Rock heading to Dallas, Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, and it diverted to Tulsa for some reason. And let's see here. Let me see. Let me get the file here, and I have some audio from liveatc.net. And what I did was I went in there. Liveatc.net is a great site. You can go in there and you can, if they have volunteers that have set up scanners at that particular airport or area, and they record these and they keep them in an archive. And so I was looking at the report on the Aviation Herald and some local Tulsa news outlets, and I could tell exactly when this flight operated. I also used flightaware.com. And then I went into liveatc.net. I found that indeed Tulsa had somebody with a scanner recording various air traffic control frequencies. Now the problem with the scanner is that it's a scanner. It will pick up something and then it'll start cycling through some frequencies and then it'll hear something else maybe on a different frequency. So on the recording that I had, it had Kansas City Center, it had Tulsa approach control, it had ground, it had clearance delivery, it had a whole bunch of different things kind of interspersed there. So what I did was I edited this audio file and just excerpted the pertinent information from this flight. So anyway, here's what one of the articles said. The passengers and crew aboard American Airlines Flight 1461 faced tense moments Wednesday afternoon after the plane lost its computer system. I'm thinking to myself, if my airplane lost its computer system, would the passengers and crew face tense moments? No, not really. There is a video from a news helicopter, Sky News 6, showing the American Airlines MD-80 coming into Tulsa. And in the video, it's clear that the main landing gear doors are in the down position and not flush with the airplane, which means that they must have manually lowered the landing gear, which would seem to indicate to me a hydraulic system malfunction. Let me see. There's another source of information here. Passengers credit pilot for safe landing at Tulsa International. And then in the Aviation Herald, they say when they were climbing out of Little Rock, the crew stopped the climb and decided to divert to Tulsa, Oklahoma, reporting flight control difficulties. The crew subsequently requested additional maneuvering space as their ability to maneuver was limited and advised that they would need to stop on the runway and be towed off the runway. Again, that would seem to indicate to me hydraulic system malfunction. And so the aircraft was positioned for an approach to runway 36 right and landed safely. Okay, and so let me play the audio that I was able to extract from this.
Okay, thank you. Got all that, American 1461, and we'd like vector for long final approach, ILS, probably just...
You want to understand ILS runway 36 right, long vectors, turn to left, 270 vectors for the ILS 36 right, descend positive, maintain 5,000.
Okay, heading 270 down to 5,000 feet, American 1461.
1461. We don't have difficulty with flight control, so we're going to need extra space behind us and in front of us, or we have a limited ability to maneuver.
Okay, well, this is a head scratcher to me. I have no idea what is going on that would cause them a limited maneuverability. If it was a hydraulic problem, well, as many of you know, if you've listened to my show, the airplane that we fly, the MD-80 series, doesn't have hydraulic controls for maneuvering at all. They're all cable and pulleys going out to control tabs that deflect into the airstream and move the control surface. The only thing that we have on the airplane that is controlled by hydraulics as far as a control surface is the rudder. And the rudder at this point is not going to limit your maneuverability. So I'm not really sure what is going on at this point.
You are number one, sir, and I will keep the final clear. 1461, 100 miles from the final approach force, heading a 340 and 500 hill status. The localizer, $3 runway 36 right approach.
340 heading 3,500 till established, cleared for the approach for 36 right, American 1461. We're going to plan on stopping on the runway 30.
7 Okay, the controller kind of stepped on the last part of that transmission, but essentially what he said was that he was cleared for the approach and they were going to be stopping on the runway straight ahead and we're going to have to be towed off of the runway. Again, that indicates to me some kind of a hydraulic problem.
Flight control, computer malfunction, and the controls are handling pretty much normal right now, just to let you know.
Okay. This is one I'm just completely puzzled about. He said that there is a flight control computer malfunction, but all the flight controls are operating normally at this point. Well, the airplane that he is flying and that I'm flying doesn't have a flight control computer. Unless they have something special on their airplane. I don't have any idea what he's talking about. What is a flight control computer? There are no computers. It's not an Airbus 320. Again, everything is manual on this airplane. Maybe he's talking about the autopilot. But if the autopilot system is not working, then that's not a major deal. You just hand fly the airplane. I don't understand. I really don't.
1461, can you see our gear?
Okay, he just asked if the tower could see his gear. I guess they've manually extended the landing gear, and he was just checking to see if tower noticed whether it looked okay to them or not. Again, because this is a scanner, a lot of the communications back and forth were not captured.
Yeah, we're just going to quick checklist to be done.
Okay, I think that last little piece was after they had already landed, and they were wondering about whether they're going to, require any further assistance. And he said, no, we're just going to do the checklist, and then they're finished. So there you go. If any of you have any more information, I've been looking for it. Haven't been able to discern exactly what happened, but Brian sent this to me and was wondering, can you speak to how a modern airliner would fly differently with a computer failure? No, especially my airplane, an MD-80 series airplane, Brian, I have no idea. Really am scratching my head on this one. I don't understand exactly what obviously they had a problem. It was serious enough that they had to divert. It was serious enough they had to manually lower the gear and stop straight ahead on the runway. And for some reason, whatever they were experiencing was limiting their maneuverability. And I've been flying this airplane as a captain for 12 years, more than 12 years, and I really don't know what happened there. Very strange. So, if any of you know any more about this, please let me know. Then I won't have to scratch my head anymore. Thanks, Brian. Charles, I was talking about on a couple of episodes ago, the TWA 800 documentary, which is now on Netflix. And Charles writes, I worked at Ontario Tower then, and local newspapers carried articles from a local man, Mr. Sanders. He got to look at items before they sealed the investigation, and he found some items of interest. And then he has a link for me, and I'll have that in the show notes so you can look at it yourself. Also, at that time, a newspaper from France got their hands on photos showing a missile path towards the aircraft. I guess this was on the internet, then it was taken down. And with war games going on that night, and the training areas were hot, it also makes sense that the missile was fired from a ship towards the P3 overhead, with TWA inadvertently being in the path. The crew on the ship was immediately held for a period of time. So here's my 2 cents of what I heard and observed. Enjoy the podcast very much. And again, that's Charles. He's a CFI, a CE, ATP, ATCS. So lots of letters there. So looks like an air transport pilot, certified air transport pilot, and a certified air traffic control supervisor or systems operator or something. So thanks, Charles, for your insight. And again, I'll have that link that Charles sent me about Mr. Sanders and what he observed in the investigation. Okay, Paul, and this is an interesting one. Paul, it's Paul from Greece again. I have a question about the working environment in the cockpit. I was told by flight instructors that it is normal that captains shout at their first officers if they do something wrong. I told them that's a pretty aggressive thing to do, and that almost nobody would perform any better by doing this. After a lot of arguing, they told me that I would have a problem in the cockpit since I don't like being shouted at, and I can't concentrate when someone's doing this. I'm telling you all this because I would like to know your opinion. Is it true? And is that bad for a future airline pilot? I am sure that you covered that topic many times, but since I have a very tight schedule, no. Paul, I've never had this question before. I've never talked about this topic. Again, he signs off by saying, many thanks, keep up the great work. Greetings from sunny Greece. And he said, sorry for my English. Oh, your English is great, Paul. A heck of a lot better than my Greek, that's for sure. So, now, this captain, I've been a captain now for, 14... How long have I been a captain? I checked out in 2000 or 1999. I know, something like 14 years, at least. Okay? Have I ever yelled at my first officer? No. I have never, ever. I don't shout at people. I don't yell at people. I don't yell at my wife. I don't yell at my kids. I know that's not usual. That's not normal. And I've never claimed to be a normal person. But I am not, I don't get upset like that. I don't yell at people. I don't shout at people. And that may be appropriate in your household or in your car, with your children or whatever, your family. But it's not appropriate in a cockpit, ever. And I'm thinking back to all the years that I was a co-pilot and flight engineer, and I was never yelled at all during that time, ever. I never heard anybody yell at me or shout at me. Maybe people wanted to, but they never did. So very that's very unusual, at least for my experience in U.S. carriers. Perhaps it's a cultural thing. Maybe in Greece and in other parts of the world that is a normal thing, but everything that I've learned in CRM, cockpit resource management, or crew resource management, would say that that is the worst thing you can do, is to yell at somebody or shout at somebody. The only time I ever shout is if I have to open up the window and and communicate with my tug driver because the headset or whatever is not working. Of course, I'm not yelling at them in anger. I'm yelling at them because it's so noisy. They couldn't hear me if I was just talking normally. But no, I've never ever shouted in anger at anyone in a cockpit, and nor do I think that is an appropriate thing to do. So I don't know what these flight instructors are talking about. And if you're in an environment where people are yelling at you, yeah, it's normal to be distracted and not be able to focus. And that's just hogwash, what they're saying about, well, you can't be a future airline pilot because if you can't stand being yelled at, then you're in the wrong business. Now, again, maybe, Paul, I live in my own little cocoon and protected world, and maybe I don't know what really is happening out there in other airline cockpits around the world, but for those of you listening right now, let me know, is that normal in your country and your culture for that kind of an environment? I mean, that's something I just have never heard of in at least the U.S. Airline cockpit environment. So, again, maybe I'm all washed up, but man, I think they're dead wrong about shouting and yelling and that kind of thing. I just don't think it's the right place. That does not help safety. It hurts safety, and that's all I have to say about that. So let me know, folks, if I'm wrong about this, or maybe in Greece or Turkey or the Middle East or Asia or wherever you happen to be flying, maybe that is the environment that is normal. But man, I wouldn't be able to operate. I wouldn't be able to fly. I wouldn't be able to stand this job if that were something that occurred all the time. And do we make mistakes? Of course we do. That's the reason why we're not up there by ourselves. That's why we're a crew. There are two of us at least, sometimes more, in that cockpit. And there's a good reason for that, because we are human, and as hard as we try not to, we sometimes make mistakes. So if you make a mistake, you don't want the other person yelling at you. That's, again, I'm kind of flabbergasted that these flight instructors of yours say that it's normal. Tell them that this captain, airline pilot guy, said that they are wrong, that they don't know what they're talking about, and stop yelling at their students. Stop it. Okay. Rob says, hi, Captain Jeff. Love your podcast. Been listening in for about 1 month now and have decided to start at number 1. Woo! Good luck. I drove a licensed London taxi for 27 years, but I'm employed now as a building maintenance guy. All of my life, however, I've loved aviation. Don't ask me why I never went into it as a career, but there you are. I was lucky to visit the United States in 1971 and remember flying home in a 707 from JFK to Gatwick via a stop to take on fuel at Bangor, Maine. Took off, and about 20 minutes into the flight encountered a really bad storm. I was 15 years old at the time, said the Hail Mary and Our Father quite a few times, and when I woke up, there was daylight in the cabin. Amen. God bless you. Rob from London, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. That sounds kind of like Tom's turbulent flight experience. Oh, by the way, you said you were going to start listening at number 1, which I believe is the the very first episode of Airline Pilot Guy, and I talked a lot about the Air France 447, I think is the number, the Air France flight that crashed over the Atlantic in 2009. You may not know this or not, but before I rebranded my podcast, I was Catholic Pilot. And don't worry, it's okay to listen to those shows. It's 99% pilot stuff, pretty much like this show. But I do occasionally talk a little bit about my Catholic faith as well in that podcast. And I put out like 39, 40 podcasts or so before I decided to rebrand this thing Airline Pilot Guy. So if you're interested in hearing the very, very beginning, start with Catholic Pilot 1 and work your way up. And again, if you're not offended by people talking about things they have strong beliefs in, like religion, faith, that kind of thing, you should listen. In fact, I need to go back and listen and see how bad I sounded back then. But yeah, APG number 1 was not my first podcast. It was, I'd already had about almost 40 of them in the can by that point. Okay. How are we doing on the time here? I've been going for about 2 hours, I think. Yeah. And I got a lot more stuff to talk about. Okay, Sean sent me this feedback. I have a question regarding the Mad Dog. After boarding an Acme Mad Dog in Atlanta bound for Indianapolis, before engine start, I noticed that the ailerons were deflected fully as if turning to the right. They stayed in that position after the engine started and did not return to the neutral position until the takeoff roll began. Needless to say, I was relieved to see them return to neutral. Am I misremembering this, or is this normal? Also, if the meal choices were fish or steak, would you get the lasagna?
What was it we had for dinner tonight?
Well, we had a choice, steak, fish.
Yes, I remember I had lasagna.
Keep up the great work. I'm a trucker, and your podcast really helps to pass the time. I like the long format. I wouldn't even mind if you made it longer. Wishing you tailwinds and severe clear, Sean. Okay, Sean. You must be misremembering and losing your mind. No, that is actually, believe it or not, normal. Again, the flight controls on the Mad Dog are kind of strange. They don't have anything. Well, they do have something connected to them. Those ailerons that you were looking out the window at, there are some cables that go out there, but they don't actually go to any kind of a hydraulic actuator. There are no hydraulic actuators out there anywhere near the ailerons. They have these little cables that go out there and actually move the little, I don't know, I'd say maybe a 2-foot long, I'm guessing, tab on the trailing edge of that aileron. And that's what moves. So if I'm in the cockpit and you're out there looking at that aileron and I move the control yoke fully to the right, the little tab, let's see, let me make sure I do this right. I'm going to the right. That means that the aileron's going to need to come down on the right wing. No, up on the right wing. The aileron will be down on the left wing. And so to make the aileron go up on the right wing, the control tab has to deflect downward. So that when I'm moving the control yoke in the cockpit, the little cable is going through all these pulleys and everything out, through the fuselage, out to the wing, out to the aileron, out to that little control tab on the trailing edge of that aileron, and deflecting the control tab down. And the forces of air will cause the aileron to deflect up, which will then, in turn, make the wing drop down. And, of course, the opposite is happening on the other side, on the left wing. And then the airplane turns. Voila. That's the way this thing works. Now, you're on the ground and you have some wind that's blowing the ailerons. Okay, there's nothing there keeping those ailerons from moving. So if the wind's blowing, they may deflect one way or another. And so that's what you were seeing. Full deflection of the aileron on the right side, and as soon as they started getting some air flowing over the wings, that caused the ailerons to fare into the wind, and then you reach a certain airspeed, and then those control tabs become effective, and guess what? Now you have control of those ailerons. So yeah, it's crazy. I don't know of any other airplane. There probably are airplanes out there that operate like that, but this is the only one that I've flown that have worked like that. And same thing with the elevator. You get behind a Mad Dog that does not have a powered elevator. The 90 has a powered elevator, but the MD-80 series does not. And it's not unusual to look at the elevator of the horizontal stabilizer, on the aft end of the horizontal stabilizer, and see one deflected upwards and the other one deflected downwards. And you look at that and go, oh my gosh, they can't take off like that. They're broken. Something's wrong with that airplane. Nope, it's a Mad Dog. Same thing with the DC-9. Of course, a Mad Dog is a DC-9, a more modern version of it. So yeah, very, very strange, but it works great. Okay, what else did I want to say about that? Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that if you've ever been on a MD-80 series airplane or DC-9 in very, very windy conditions, especially if you're sitting back toward the back of the airplane, but you can even feel it up in the front. When the wind is blowing from behind, sometimes the elevator back there is getting lifted and then dropped pretty violently by the wind, and it actually you can feel the airplane shake a little bit when that happens. And it must be disconcerting for somebody, riding in the back thinking, what the heck is that noise and what is that vibration? Something doesn't feel right. But that's just the way it works. There's nothing to power that elevator back there to keep it from moving in very strong wind. So there we have it. Thank you, Sean. Let's see, Matt writes, Matthew. He's from Cork in Ireland, and I've only recently discovered your podcast, and I must say that I was almost immediately hooked. It's a wonderful thing, and I hope you continue it. As still being a university student, I need my aviation fix to get me through the seemingly endless study until I can pursue my lifelong dream of being an airline pilot. I used to religiously read Captain Dave's Flight Level 390 blog until, for whatever reason, he stopped posting. Needless to say, I had to fill a void following that, and I find that your podcast does the trick. Well, thanks. I'm glad that I was there to fill that void, Matthew. And I understand several people have said that Captain Dave's Flight Level 390 blog was excellent. I never saw it myself. I don't know what happened to Captain Dave. Maybe he just got burnt out. I hope that I'll continue on and not get burnt out myself. And but anyway, here we go. Let's continue with your feedback. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to become a pilot. And since then, I've tried to accumulate a large amount of aviation knowledge, general knowledge. But as is well known in the industry, a good pilot is always learning. That's so true. And so I do have one or two questions I may throw your way, if you don't mind. No, not at all. Firstly, I want to address a question that was posed to you in episode 118 regarding what would occur in a fly-by-wire aircraft that suffers a total loss of electrical power. I believe the gentleman's name was Jim, and I remember him saying he was a fan of Air Crash Investigation, which is, I believe, a television series. I would refer him to the episode of that show that covered Air Transat 236, following a fuel leak leading to a fuel exhaustion situation. And by the way, I'm not sure, this is Jeff speaking now, if they covered this in the Air Crash Investigation series, but it turns out that the captain actually mismanaged the fuel leak and ended up doing something wrong, and the fuel that was isolated from the leak, he ended up connecting to the tank that had the leak and then basically exhausted all of their fuel. So while he used his excellent aviation skills to basically dead stick this airplane for a landing. He sort of caused not the entire problem, but a big part of the problem himself. So he was both hero and villain in this case, I'd say. Anyway, following a leak leading to a fuel exhaustion situation, the crew deployed a RAT fan, a ram air turbine, which I understand acts as a small turbine spinning in the oncoming airflow to provide a limited amount of electrical power to critical systems on the aircraft, Airbus 330 in this case. Funnily enough, this information helped me during an interview for a cadetship to my dream job with Aer Lingus. Because I have no private pilot license and only approximately 20 hours of flight experience, I feel they were impressed by my answer. However, perhaps not enough as I was unsuccessful. Such is life. Just one or two questions. Okay, so getting back to your comment about the ram air turbine, yes, that would be a source of electricity, but I was going with his premise. I believe you're right. It was Jim asking about a complete loss of electrical power, and I just assumed he also meant that for whatever reason the ram air turbine wouldn't work either, and if there is anything mechanically connected to the control surfaces to operate them. And if we're going to be pure about it and say there was absolutely no electricity, then, again, we're back to the situation where I don't know what could possibly be a backup for operating the airplane without electricity. But you're right, Matthew. They do have ram air turbines that will drop out and extend into the airstream and power an electrical generator. Sometimes they power hydraulic pumps and other critical things. Okay, so back to Matthew's feedback. Just one or two questions. So because this email is very quickly becoming long-winded. Firstly, I am an FSX pilot, Flight Simulator X pilot, that attempts to fly as realistically as possible. And so the first question refers to increasing my knowledge in this respect. I know you're not an Airbus man, but perhaps one of your listeners may be able to answer. During a takeoff in an Airbus, is it at a certain altitude or is it after a certain amount of time that the thrust levers are reduced to the climb gate? Okay, I don't know the answer to that. Okay, again, the question out there, you Airbus pilots, is it a matter of a certain altitude or is it after a certain amount of time that you reduce the thrust levers to the climb gate? I'll just take a guess, but it's probably like in my airplane, once we reach 1,000 feet, then we set climb power and then retract the flaps and clean up the airplane. So I would imagine it's probably more to do with a certain altitude, Matthew, rather than a certain amount of time. But I don't know the definitive answer, so you Airbus pilots out there, please let me know, or let Matthew know. And my second question is there any rule of thumb that can be used to calculate the temperature that should be entered into the FMC/FMGS for a D-rate flex temp takeoff? Always wondered this and would be great to finally get a definitive answer. Okay, rule of thumb for the temperature that should be entered into the flight management computer for a D-rate flex temp takeoff. Again, I'm not sure. I assume you're referring to the Airbus. I know that when we use D-rate or reduced power or flex temp takeoffs in the Mad Dog, it's nothing. We don't enter any temperature into the flight management computer. It just we get data that gives us various power settings on assumed temperatures, and that's how we get the flex rate or the D-rate settings, power settings. Perhaps the only thing that is automatically assumed or inputted into the flight management computer is from a sensor that is, providing it with the ambient temperature, and then it uses its calculations based on that. Again, Really, I guess I'm not really qualified to answer this question, Matthew, because we don't receive our performance and takeoff data from our own flight management computers. We receive it from our performance department, load planners, a special department at our company that takes in all the data, all the load data of the airplane, the cargo, the passenger weights, the ambient conditions and everything else, and somebody's putting it all into the master computer, and then it spits out the performance data, and then we get it via our ACARs, and we print it out, and that's how we get our takeoff data. We don't do it internally. So I can't really answer that question for you there. So finally he says, I know you enjoy some tasty beer from around the world. Yes. But in Ireland, it's more stout than beer. Well, stout is beer. Stout is an ale, which is beer. So if you ever find maybe that's just the way they refer to things in Ireland, which very well could be that a beer, when you say you want a beer, that probably means something like a pale ale or something, or a bitter. But if you want stout, you say stout. But okay, I'll get back to your question here. So if you ever find yourself in Cork, we'll go for a pint of the local stout. Murphy's, a favorite of mine. Huh, okay. I would love to do that. They say that the local stout, Murphy's or Guinness if you prefer, is amazingly good when it's fresh and right there in Ireland. That's all for now, so until next time, tailwinds in cruise and soft landings in crosswinds. And as we say in Ireland...
Go Rev Mahagost. Go Rev.
I had to find that on YouTube, Matthew. He spelled this out for me, and he actually put a pronunciation guide for me. So I'm going to try it. Slán Agasker Evma Agut. Slán Agasma, meaning bye and thanks. Man. Okay, thanks, Matthew. Sorry, I screwed that up. Maybe you can record yourself next time and you can say that, and we'll know exactly how to say it. Okay. 2 hours and 15 minutes or so. Let's keep going here. Tillman. Oh, this is great. Tillman sent us some audio. He's my on-scene, on-location reporter at the Berlin Air Show.
Ooh, hey Captain Jeff, this is Private Pilot Tillman sending you a quick voice feedback from Berlin, Germany, where I'm at the Berlin International Air Show, ILA, or Internationale Luftfahrtausstellung. You may or may not be able to hear the aircraft in the background. At the moment we are watching the Breitling jet team with their L-39C Albatross. And it's 7 of them in close formation, very, very low above the ground. And it's actually quite impressive. And yeah, I just thought I'd share this aviation moment with you and your listeners. So thanks for the great show, and talk to you soon.
Is that awesome or what? Thank you, Tillman. It's air show season. Again, that's Tillman, the private pilot Tillman at the Berlin Air Show. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce what ILA stands for. So thanks for taking the time to do that, Tillman. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure our readers do as well. Readers, our listeners. Okay. And some more audio feedback, this time from Nick.
Hi, Captain Jeff. Nick Olsen from Atlanta. Just one quick question for you today. I've noticed that there's a lot of delays in the New York airports, LaGuardia and John F. Kennedy, plus New York Liberty. And I was just wondering, why do they have such massive delays most of the year? I always want to that because they are used to the amount of traffic coming in, and to also we have an idea why they still have such massive delays. Thank you, and looking forward to your take on it. Bye now.
Well, thank you, Nick. And it was a little bit difficult to hear Nick there. He's using the Google Voice line. And the cool thing about Google Voice, if you have a Google Voice line, is that Google will, a computer translates what people say to text. Now let me show you how well this works. I'm going to read the transcript from Google Voice. I guess incest. Nicholson from Atlanta. If that sort of questions for you today, hi, this is notice that there's a lot. A U.S. collision. C. Neil. You know, coursework, lawyer, soreness, Kitty Plus, Newark Liberty. And I just wanted, what do they have such massive delays? Most of you, for you higher price one through sad, because see, if you could call you, Steve, the amount of traffic coming in until also, please have to hide you. You, wise base, 0.00 massive delay. Thank you, and looking forward to you date on it. I am. I'm sorry. I had to read the transcript. I think they actually have websites out there that do nothing but put the Google Voice text translation or transcript from voice. They're pretty funny. Okay. Sorry, Nick. That wasn't not meant to have fun at your expense. I understood actually everything you said, and you were asking about why do the New York City and the New York area airports have such massive delays, seems like most of the year. And I think the main reason for it is that they receive a lot of traffic, and they are served by 3 separate airports within a very close proximity of each other, and that's one of the problems, because if you have 3 very large airports, Newark Liberty, John F. Kennedy, and LaGuardia, all handling a huge amount of traffic, both in and out, and they're geographically so close to each other. The airspace is literally, we've talked about this before. When you have an emergency off of John F. Kennedy, you have the flight path of everybody coming into LaGuardia coming in, and you can't encroach upon that area, that airspace, without being a problem. It's just a mess up there. And so they have very, very busy airports very close to each other, and then you throw in a little bit of low visibility or thunderstorms or anything that is not perfectly visual condition, or winds. Winds can be really, really strong up there, and that can cause its own problems with having to operate on certain runways all within that close proximity, and it's just a mess. So, if one little thing hiccups up there, it just has a ripple effect in a negative way all the way down. In fact, it actually affects a lot of the other hub airports for various airlines around the entire system. United at Newark. Well, I'm not going to go through all the different airlines, but it's just a mess up there. If they had more space, more airspace, and the airports were farther apart, I don't think massive delays would be such a problem, because they'd just have the space to work all that stuff out. But that is my best answer for you, Nick, and as always, I do appreciate your feedback and questions. All right, Zach writes, I've listened to one of your podcasts so far, the most recent one, Airline Pilot Guy 118, and loved it. I am in the simulations a lot, and he owns his own 2006 copy of FSX. I'm also training to be a real-world pilot. I took my first and only lesson so far at age 15 in a Cessna 172R. First of all, I have recently joined United Airlines Virtual and have no idea how to operate the FMC in my 737-800. Is it possible for you to help with that? Also, what is your favorite airport to fly in and out of? Thanks, and love the show. Keep it up. Zach. Well, thanks, Zach, for your feedback. Now, Zach, did you hear my show on Jetstream Radio, the internet radio station specifically for flight simmers? Just curious. Wondering if my shows, I think my shows started playing a couple weeks ago, and it'd be nice to hear from those of you listening who heard me on Jetstream Radio, just to kind of get an idea of who's out there. Now, back to your question. Well, first of all, welcome to Airline Pilot Guy, the community, Zach. Secondly, you're going to find that everybody here that are fantastic people. They really help me a lot answer questions. For instance, like one that you have. You have no idea how to operate the FMC, the flight management computer, in your 737-800. Is it possible for me, Captain Jeff, to help you with that? No, because I have no idea how to operate that darn thing either. So, because I've never flown the 737, and I really can't help you there. But maybe somebody listening might have some kind of a resource to point you to, or maybe they know how to operate one themselves. They have experience with the real one, or possibly the flight simulator version of it, and they might be able to get you up and running with that. And your second question, what is your favorite airport to fly in and out of? I really don't have the favorite airports that I have, Zach, that I like flying in and out of are the ones that allow me to fly some kind of a really cool visual approach procedure. So unlike so many pilots that I fly with, I really love flying into LaGuardia, especially when they're doing expressway visual approaches. The other airport I love flying into and out of, mostly into, is DCA, Washington National, because when they're operating to the south and the weather's good enough, we can fly the river visual approach. So you follow the Potomac River down toward the mall and the Lincoln Memorial and all that kind of stuff, and then you make a quick right turn at the very end and line yourself up with the runway. And I love those because you're really flying the airplane. Although I have seen people, again, head scratcher to me, flying the airplane through the autoflight system. But to me, it's like, what better excuse do you have to fly than to do these visual approaches? Again, maybe it's just I'm an old codger, and I don't know. I just don't get it. But those are the two airports I love flying into because of the fact that I can sometimes get to fly that visual approach. Because I love the way it feels to fly an airplane. Actually manipulate the controls myself. All right. You know what? Gosh, I still have so many more to go to here. And I was hoping that I would be able to catch up. But if you've listened to this show enough, you know that I'll never, ever, ever catch up on feedback. I'll get close. So the last one I read was from Zach. He sent it to me on the 25th. And it's the 29th. So, hey, that was only about 4 days ago. That's pretty good. But I have feedback from Low Time Larry. Ron asks a question about crash axes. Michael from Tampa, another flight simulation question. Aditya Kurana, he has a great question about holding. Mark wrote about a U.S. Air divert. Ellis, Sangwoo, Randall, Frick, Sean in Sweden, Matthias asks about popping ears. John sends something about FedEx Flight 705. Alan, Kevin, Tim, Arun, and more. Maybe you might be next on the next episode, but I'm going to have to shut it down. I'm not only getting close to the 2.5 hour point, but the sun is setting. It's starting to get kind of late here. I got another early report time in the morning. I need to get a good night's sleep, and before I do that, I need to go and grab some food for dinner so I can get a good night's sleep. So, with that, I think it is now time to call this one quits. So Airline Pilot Guy episode 119 is almost in the can. And until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care and God bless.
Good day.